Welcome to another episode of Sustainable Goat. I'm Steve Cassingham, and I interview the greatest of all time in sustainability from the past, present, and into the future. In this episode, we talk with Jenifer Gorin, founder of Impact Growth Partners. If you've ever wondered how to become B-Corp certified, Jen and her team are here to help. As a whole, the decision to become B-Corp certified is so much bigger than just putting a label on your product or website. It is a commitment to running a business that is taking action around environmental and social impact. Jen has a great story of taking her investment banking knowledge and passion for sustainability and using that to help companies make the world a better place. So let's jump right into the conversation. I figured we'd just dive in, and I'd love to learn a little bit about more, where you originally come from. What's your life look like?
In the sustainability space, I actually don't come from a sustainability background. I come from a more traditional business background. After college, I worked for a market research firm called Pension in Berlin, where we did corporate market research as well as political consulting, which was a lot of fun. I really like the discipline. I like the team. I like the clients we work with. But what I discovered during some work with clients in the C-suite was that, wow, what's really driving the decisions? We can say as much as we want about marketing, but what's driving the decisions is finance. And I knew nothing about that. So I'm like, okay, I better go to business school and learn a little about finance and do what all of my friends after college did, which was work in investment banking, which is, one of those crazy jobs, especially right after college, where you work a million hours a week. After business school, it wasn't quite so bad. It definitely worked really, really hard, but I actually enjoyed it. Quantitative perspective and intellectual perspective, you are learning a lot. It exposes you to so much. And so I did that for about 10 years, working with media and telecom companies, first in the UK and then in the US, helping them raise capital in the equity markets, a lot of debt offerings, also mergers, some IPOs. So across the board, I worked with companies that were on the smaller side, $300 million valuation, to multi-billion dollar companies. And that was an exciting career. And it feels like a long time ago now, interesting to talk about. But then when we moved out to Westport, Connecticut, I realized the commute into the city with two little kids just wasn't going to work. So I did some nonprofit consulting. And when I decided I wanted to get back to the paid workforce, I wanted to kind of merge the two. And interestingly, when I was in the traditional business world, it was more common than any way to think this way, but it still holds true in a lot of the traditional business world. My view was that profits were for business and everything else was for philanthropy, NGOs. Business didn't have to have an impact. And yeah, so I've done a complete 180. I completely disagree with that now. And that is what my work is dedicated to now. So after working with some nonprofits, I discovered impact investing. And that's when I realized, okay, and in those 10 years, our capitalist system has gotten even more crazy and extreme. And so there's more evidence that business really has to play a role. I mean, not that it didn't exist in the early 2000s, but every year it continues to get worse and worse. So I really felt compelled to do something on that. And that's when I discovered B Corps. And that's the beginning of the end of the story.
So, my God, going through, so investment banking and finance is a different world. It's crazy. I mean, I come from a little bit of that, more so from the marketing side, and working with the companies that have the big valuations. And you're right. It's just, hey, what's our Series B going to be? What's our Series C going to be? And it's always just focused on that, whatever that number is, and how can you raise that money? Where did you kind of see that problem being able to be solved? I mean, because impact investing now, I think in the right circles, a lot of people are very familiar with it, but it's kind of been something that I think has been getting a lot of traction over the last 5 to 10 years. But before that, what was kind of that mindset in that world? Because big business and small business, I think, is a bit different in terms of the mindset.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is it wasn't anything that was viewed when I was working in business. It wasn't viewed as something that should be solved. It was really just, oh, there are government laws that impose certain restrictions on what business can do. And then there's philanthropy that helps solve other problems and NGOs, and it really was either, there was some thought about, oh, triple bottom line, but I would literally like poo-poo that and say that, that's not something that makes any sense. It's because, as you were just saying, that number is so important. And there still really is no clean solution. There's no like, you have your gap number, and there are a lot of metrics in SASB and stuff, but you have your gap number and your valuation and your metrics that based on your financials. There isn't an equivalent for sustainability yet, but there are lots of them out there. And I think that's part of the steps, is figuring out how to incorporate metrics. And there's so many directions this conversation could go in now, but one thing that it does make me think of, Danone for the past number of years has been very focused on sustainability, and actually Danone North America became a B-Corp. Most of their subsidiaries did. Danone Worldwide was focused on becoming a certified B-Corp. And activist investors decided, wait a second, they're not as profitable as they should be, pushed the board of directors to oust the CEO who was leading a lot of that, right? So
God,
it's a fundamental problem with our market system, is that if you run a business that is successful and still meet sustainability goals, if there's room for there to be increased financial margin, the activist investors are going to get you. So which shows that you need to have stronger boards of directors. And then also there needs to be, in addition to these metrics that I alluded to identify how companies are doing on impact related metrics, the answer may be just requiring more of a cost to companies that don't meet them, so that there is some actual financial impact, whether it's carbon offsets or something along those lines that really penalize them financially for not meeting social and environmental goals. But this is a long way off. I think we have a lot more, forget what the name of the activist investment firm is, but we have a lot more of those situations that are going to happen before there's really enough coalescence around a solution. But the more people we get involved in impact investing and wanting to see ESG metrics met by companies, that it will continue to evolve.
yeah. I mean, that's the saddest part, is just seeing, these founders who have incredible ideas and set out to change the world, and then the people that helped fund it are just like, no, we're gonna go this way, because we want to profit. And it's interesting to see the shift. You can see the motivation from each side, but I think the world's at a point right now where change has to be made, and it has to come from people who are making those bigger decisions, because it's coming from the small side too. And I think the big side, they're starting to kind of take it on, but it's kind of like that drop in the bucket kind of thing that's happening, where it's like we're a part of this, but we're really not. And I've kind of noticed that across the board. For you, I mean, where did sustainability come from? Was it something that you kind of had in your childhood? Was it something you kind of discovered?
So, yeah, I mean, I did take a traditional business path in my career after college, but I've always been very progressive. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, to date myself, with my mom recycling and composting and making foods from scratch, and like everything that now is like seen as part of life, but it was surprising then. She would literally like go to the dump with our recycling and put stuff in the things. So she definitely had that sustainability mindset. Both my parents were very progressive politically. I've always been involved in politics. So it's really just been making the world a better place has kind of always been one of my goals, even if learning about business and securing my basic, I guess I was, thinking back 25 years, I guess I was securing my future, making sure that, I had a stable income, and I actually loved what I did. And I love what I do now even more, but, my underlying goal has always been to do something to have a positive impact on the world.
Yeah, so talk a little bit more about that. So you decided to leave and you wanted to just go your own way. What was that process like, where you're like kind of like that last month of working and before you're consulting, what did that look like, where you were kind of like, okay, what do I really want to do?
Right. Oh, well, there were a number of years between working in investment
Mm-hmm.
banking and starting my consulting firm. So
Mm-hmm.
that was a process of going part-time for a little while, then realizing, it just wasn't going to work out, taking my severance package and doing nothing, doing PTA stuff. And as I mentioned, some nonprofit consulting. And then when I discovered B Corps, I realized I was debating between whether to use my direct financial background and do something in investing or helping companies find investments. And this was in 2014. And at the same time, this was when some of the larger private equity firms like Bain Capital Impact was launched. There were a couple of other large impact funds launched. So all of a sudden there were hundreds of millions or billions of dollars looking for impact investments. But if you look at the public markets, what's considered an impact investment is screening out, screening for different criteria, and you get the same bucket of 20 companies, no matter how you screen based on, what types of programs they have in place. And they're not really truly impactful companies. And I realized growing the awareness of something like B Corp, it's an amazing infrastructure around impact that in other ways doesn't exist at the scale, even though it's still very small. They really have the infrastructure there to enable investors, consumers, employees to identify, okay, this is a good company that I want to align myself with the goal that as they proliferate, more and more companies will want to become B Corps. And even if they don't, they're going to improve their social and environmental impact in the process. And then as more become, they will grow, they'll get more funding, and then there will be more, it will just grow the ecosystem. Kind of like when farms were pushed to be organic, that was a huge process and a lot didn't do it. But then when you saw that, oh, consumers will pay a little more for the apple with a sticker that has the 9 on it because they know that it's organic, then the organic movement has grown tremendously since that happened, even as cumbersome as it seemed, and it still is cumbersome. Many farms choose not to do it. It's not a perfect system, neither is B Corp. But that's the ultimate goal in building, in my mind, in helping grow the B Corp ecosystem. So it was a long process. I actually took a course online with Ryan Honeyman from Lift Economy on B Corp consulting to learn more about it. At that point, I wasn't necessarily convinced that I was going to be a consultant, but then eventually I decided that was the best business to get started. Also, I live in Connecticut, where until a couple of years ago, there were only 3 certified B Corps, but we have an economic environment here where you would think we have a lot, because there's a lot of, we're a very blue state, a lot of progressive mindset, also a lot of wealth, but there was really just no awareness of it. So now we're up to over 10. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to get it started, because I wanted to build a community here, which is something that we're working on now, is establishing Connecticut Be Local and continuing to raise the awareness here in Connecticut, though our clients are national and international.
Yeah, so tell me about your firm that you did start. So you finally decided you were going to start a firm. What was that like when you first started? Was it kind of overwhelming? Was it exciting? A little bit of both? Because I mean, when you start your business, there's a little bit of like this, well, will it catch, or am I just like kind of going down this path? But you have this motivation to just keep going forward no matter what.
A lot of the testing the value proposition phase, that was a long phase, as well as learning, creating the product, working with test clients. It was a very slow process, and luckily I was able to have the patience to really build our offering before worrying about charging a lot and making sure that it's a sustainable business. But it's been, that's been part of the evolution of the business, is figuring out, okay, is this a viable, do customers want this? And I kind of knew they did, since Ryan offered this course. I knew that, but was I going to be able to talk to the types of companies that were interested in certification and also wanted the help that we could offer? Because there's really a sweet spot. If you're big enough, you can put a whole team of people on the certification and execute it easily yourself. Or if you're really small, the application isn't that hard, but somewhere in between, it gets really cumbersome and once you embark on it, you realize, what, this is a tough process. You have a lot of follow-up to do. I don't know if you've ever looked at the impact assessment, but it's so robust and requires a lot of documentation that it's overwhelming. So we tested out the business case actually with, she wasn't a friend of mine then. I didn't know her very well then, but I knew of this local product called Worthy Blends. You should check them out. It's a vegan blend of vegetables, fruits, seeds, beans in like a yogurt style container. So you're getting like, it's kind of like a vegan smoothie, but in a yogurt consistency. And it's also, it doesn't have to be refrigerated. So it's shelf
That's
stable.
huge.
That's the term I was looking for. Yeah. So you can like bring it with you on the train or wherever you're going, stick it in your bag, and they taste good. They have a good balance of sugars and proteins. And anyway, they're pretty healthy. So I had known this product because I'd seen it in some local stores because one of the co-founders is from a neighboring town. I was like, that company should be a certified B Corp. And so I reached out to her. I was like, look, I have this theory that companies want help with this process. Can I help you out? And so I did that for her for free. And she was my first client. She became certified. They're much more widespread now. You should check it out. Worthy Blends. They're delicious. So
Awesome.
that's really, so then from there I had one independent contractor who was working with me, and it's like, okay, this works. We have our materials. Let's just go out there, talk to other companies.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit about your company and who's involved and how it's kind of structured and what's your overall mission. I know it's to help companies get certified B Corp, but there's also a lot more of that goes into consulting. You start to have conversations outside of that, and you bring in your knowledge of finance and building a business, and you can help people in a lot of ways. So what does that look like for your company?
Well, the way we're structured now is it's myself and I have two consultants, and they primarily do the work with the clients, the direct work, so going through the impact assessment, helping them get certified, whereas I do more of the office work and strategic thinking. And I also do work with clients when it comes, there's this legal, one thing we haven't really covered is the basics of B Corp certification, but maybe we can talk about that after. But
Yeah, yeah,
there's this
definitely.
legal requirement. So there's always questions around that. And I'm not a lawyer, but since it's governance related, my finance background helps me have an in-depth knowledge of that. So I do help companies when they have questions about the legal requirements, as well as, well, I'm not doing directly anything in financing companies. I do have a network of people I know who are interested in companies, and it is in my background. So I'm always happy to engage kind of on an unofficial basis with companies in the discussion of, oh, okay, what should I do? How should I approach this? Should I crowdfund? Should I reach out to angel investors? Do you know anyone in the space who might be interested in my firm? But that's not directly related to Impact Growth Partners. That's really just what I do because I love it, and I ultimately want to see these businesses succeed. And then in terms of the mission of Impact Growth Partners, well, the specific focus is on B Corp certification, and the tool is the B Impact Assessment. The goal is really improving social and environmental impact. So we will work with companies that may not be quite ready for B Corp certification, but by going through this process, these couple of hundred questions that identify areas across governance, your impact on the community, your suppliers, your employees, how you treat your customers, what the mission of your business is. They're so in depth. You identify in the environment, of course, you identify ways that you can do better. And many of them are practical. Many of them are just, oh, why aren't I doing that? My company could do that. That's something that I never thought of. So even if it's not a huge sea change in the way in what a company's business model is, it's incremental steps to make the company more impactful.
So is that kind of the story of how to, make a bigger impact? Is it those incremental steps? Because I think a lot of people think it has to be a hard stop, and suddenly you're, a sustainable company. But a lot of these companies they have big supply chains, and they have supply chains that do have an environmental impact. They do have an economic impact, and if they just shift, it has a huge impact on the business. So, what does that kind of look like in terms of, I guess, the mindset of the company and how they can, because some of them are a little bit more exposed to the public and can fall under a lot of scrutiny, and some it takes time. Like even just with this, if Bill Gates' new book that he just came out with, he's talking a lot about, hey, this is a long journey. Like this isn't going to be an overnight switch. So how does that look in terms of your work?
Well, the book that I would refer you and everyone to is Vincent Stanley's book, The Responsible Company, about Patagonia, because it shows you that Patagonia, which now is the flagship for sustainability, it did not start out that way. It was an evolution. They started out as this mountain climbing equipment company without thinking about who their suppliers were. And as they became aware of things, they realized that that was going to be integral to their mission. So even for Patagonia, it's been a decades long process to get to where they are. So for any company now, in some ways it's much easier to make changes because there is a lot more transparency. If a company realizes, oh, this supplier really isn't meeting goals, say they decide they want to screen their suppliers for certain requirements, and they realize the supplier is not meeting certain goals. There are many now that are paying attention to things like this and do proactively advertise what their social and environmental impact is and are willing to disclose it. So it's a lot easier than it was even a decade ago. I would say it's moving fairly quickly where companies are being pushed to make these business model changes. But unless there is, I would say it is most of the time going to be very gradual, and the change will happen, other than when there are large actors involved, whether it's a group of companies that realize that they have a specific goal and need to change how something is done. Like an example is palm oil deforestation and making that process more sustainable. That was driven by a huge group of wasn't just, it was NGOs and governments and businesses that were using palm oil as an input, which is very ubiquitous. So there are examples like that, or a government may impose a regulation that will make bigger changes. But so I think they kind of go hand in hand. And as the smaller changes are made, it will make enough of the bigger players aware of it to say, you know what, that's something we can do. Let's make it happen. Let's make a bigger change happen.
So as you guys have developed as a company, has it become a little bit easier to, I guess, like guide these companies along that pathway to becoming B Corp certified in a more, I guess, efficient way, or is it still the same problem?
Well, it really depends on the company and how they're organized, what their internal processes are. The individual within the company we're working with, every process is unique and different. So we can work with a sustainability officer in one company who wants to answer everything themselves and then realizes after a while that it's really not going to work, then brings other people in. Or we can work with a COO type who brings all the people in who need to answer all the questions right away. And in terms of the impact they're making, some companies have already thought a lot of these things through. So they already have almost an impact business model, whereas others don't and are relying more on their operations to get them the points that they need. So it really varies. I mean, in terms of our ability to guide clients through the process, it gets easier because we've been through the assessment so many times that we know what broad issues can come up and what we need to address. But again, the questions that come up for every company and their operations and reflecting those in the impact assessment are different every time.
What do you think's the biggest hurdle to get over with companies nowadays? Is it the fundamental shift of some of their business model, or is it really just being open to it?
So that's a great question. So some companies are going to have a business model that never in and of itself is going to be an impact business model, but they can make change, not never, I shouldn't say that, but their goal is not to have a business model that, for each dollar they sell is going to be make a difference, but they can operationally do things that are making a big difference. And then other companies And it's much easier for these to get certified already, whether it's a green energy company or a company that serves nonprofits or a company that is making a product that's all organic. They are already doing something that puts them more favorably in the area of, okay, you are having an impact. But change for any of them is really about awareness and then identifying the path. So a great example is that, we've worked with the most amazing companies on the environmental and health side, that are really aware of issues around sustainability and want to make sure that they're doing the best they can on those environmental areas.
That's awesome. And where do you just see this path going? So, I think now, I mean, I was just watching TV the other day, and there's a commercial from Mercedes-Benz saying, "Hey, we're taking wind energy and we're going to make our entire manufacturing by 2022 renewable." You have people making huge steps. Where do you think that big impact is going to come from? Is it going to, I know it's environmental and social and governance, and you have to kind of hit all three of those. But where do you think, is it more consumer led? Is it more business led? And which of the environmental, social, governance is kind of, you think, going to lead the charge, if you will?
Well, and environmental right now is the area with the most momentum, I would say, because investors are paying a lot of attention to it. There's a clear business case around it. You adopt clean energy technologies. There's obviously the environmental case that many people in in the investing world recognize the science behind environmental change and want to have a positive impact in that area. But they also see from a financial perspective, it will make sense in the long term to convert to renewable energy or, create a product that is more recyclable or reusable. And so so I see E as being the one that is really leading right now, or has been for the past decade or so. And investors are paying more attention to it. There's, you've seen BlackRock and the Business Roundtable. They've made their statements about making sure that all stakeholders are being considered. But most of the action is really around environmental screening and making sure companies are meeting environmental targets or divesting from fossil fuels. Maybe they haven't all gone that far, but that's ultimately the goal. It's, for some reason, it's easiest right now for investors to take action around that. But there's obviously a big movement now around social.
Mhm.
But I think that's still a big uphill battle. I think there's going to need to be increasingly more awareness among consumers about what can be done. Governments need to put in place more regulations. We're speaking from the U.S. perspective here, but I do think that's something that will need to change over time, depending on what happens with the economy. But I think that's really important. And then governance, as I said before, governance is what's really going to drive, is really the only thing that's going to ultimately drive change in how our financial markets operate towards companies that are pursuing something other than just profit. So that's a really critical change. Again, it's in the works, but a long time. And I think it's going to take a long time for that to really evolve, but it is happening. There are a number of players in the space. There's the benefit corporation legislation. More and more companies that are public are becoming benefit corporations, whether or not they're certified B-Corps, but the benefit corporation requirement requires you to take into consideration all stakeholders, not just shareholders. Boards of directors are being encouraged to and being populated by people who care more about these things, so will help make decisions that support them. And again, ultimately, it's a matter of just making sure that there are protections from investors who want to change how a company is operating because there's a little bit more profit to eke out. So that to me is the silver bullet, but it's going to be a long time coming.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's kind of a mix of all three, and I think you hit the nail right on the head that awareness is kind of the biggest piece of it. A lot of people just haven't been surrounded by the information or aware, or even been given the opportunity to just kind of see how everything, I mean, all their business practices affect the bigger ecosystem. And when it comes to community, I always find community is something to come back to. The the B Corp community, my understanding is that it's incredibly supportive and it's kind of almost like a hey, we're all in this together kind of feeling. How do you think community plays a role in just like the growth of an idea and the spreading of an idea? Is it kind of like that flash mob idea where like one person leads and then everybody's like, "Oh, sweet, I'm actually part of this." Or, is it something where everybody's kind of going together?
Well, that's the beauty of the B Corp community, is that everyone in it is going in the same direction together. So whereas there certainly are dynamics where there is one leader who pursues something and others follow. One of the reasons everyone loves to be certified B Corp, and while there are so many very tangible benefits of becoming certified, really the one that comes up most ubiquitously, regardless of the size of the company, the industry they're in, is just being exposed to and working with and connected to leaders who have the same long-term goals. That being said, within the B Corp community, there are specific action and activist areas where if you are passionate about a certain thing or have an idea, you can create your own community within a community and lead programs towards climate change or diversity or and racial justice. There's a number of different action areas going on led by different groups. So it can be a hybrid of that. But I would say everyone is trying to get to the same end goal, which is really rewarding feeling.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think the community aspect of it is so cool, because you feel like, hey, I believe in this and I'm willing to make the change and I'm not alone in that journey. And I think that sometimes when things do get difficult, I mean, it's easy for companies to make that easy choice of, well, I'll just choose this supplier because it's cheaper, it's easier, and I can make more profit at the end of the day. Which maybe one day I'll invest in more things, but does that day ever come? It's kind of taking that leap and going for it. And I think having that community around it is really important when it comes to actually having a culture inside a company. Is it important to hire, I guess, people with that similar mindset? Or is it part of, fostering a community of growth where you're like, hey, I know you may not be aware of this, but let's show you something different?
No, I think the showing is really important. So within the company, it can come from the leader who feels passionately enough about their mission that, most likely you're going to attract people who want to be working for a mission-based company. And that's in and of itself a reason companies that may not be on the face mission-based do become a certified B Corp, because it's a way for, say a staffing agency or something. Like, how are you going to compare the two? Oh, I want to work with this one because it's a certified B Corp, and you know that they are doing something. You may not know what, but something that is operating in a way that's responsible and thinking about their employees, the environment, and their community. While you're likely to get people who are mission based, it's infectious. So even if you hire someone who may not know much about what your mission and your goals are, the more they learn about it, the more it becomes something that they are really driven by. And I think the more, both internally within IGP, as in the people that I work with here and the companies we work with, the more we educate, the better. And that's one of the core things we do with the larger companies where there's going to be multiple players. And we really want to make sure that the certification just isn't achieved and then the staff doesn't know why. The more the staff knows about what being a B Corp means to the company, the more excited they get, and it just proliferates the organization.
So what is the benefit of becoming a B Corp?
Okay, there are so many, and
Hmm.
we didn't go through all of the basics of becoming a B Corp, but
We can dive in if you want. Totally fine.
it identifies you as all of these things I've said, that you're doing good socially and environmentally, you're doing good things. So you go into Whole Foods and you see your Horizon milk versus your another milk, like, oh, it's a B Corp, may as well buy, maybe I should pay attention to them by that. And actually a lot of retail environment or retailers are starting to, whether on their online platform or in store, kind of identify, oh, these are certified B Corp. So it really does contribute to awareness. if you're a consumer products space. If you're a B2B company, and when I need someone to do something, a service for my business, like create a new logo or something, let me go on to bcorporation.net, look and see what other certified B Corps there are, because I want to be working with other like-minded businesses. So from a B2B perspective, it's a great way to identify like-minded businesses. For any company, there's a lot of press around it because B Lab is always doing their own press. I mean, anytime there's an article about certified B Corps, you see Patagonia, seventh generation, method listed. So that's just, that identification is always made there. But if there's any other local or more specific press, your company may get brought into some article that is brought up. There's the community that B Lab creates. There's events. They used to be in person. They'll go back to being in person, but there's a lot of online events and educational. In the beginning, a year ago, in the height of COVID, B Lab completely shifted gears and put all of their resources towards helping their certified B Corp companies navigate through getting the PPP, healthcare issues. It was really amazing to see them shift like that and really be there for their companies in that time, slashing, giving discounts on fees and delaying recertification requirements because they wanted to make sure that businesses themselves thrived. So that gets to the benefit of having gone through this process and acting in a way a B Corp does, just really makes you think about your business in a long-term way and identifying all your stakeholders and building relationships with them. So when times are rough, they're more likely to be there for you. If you have a deep relationships with your suppliers, you get better communication from them. If there's news that you should know about, they will hopefully be better positioned to serve you through a challenging time. So it really deepens those networks. It really makes you stronger as a business because you've put the time in to think about how to establish the relationships with stakeholders. As I mentioned, you have to legally change your documentation. So you're really changing your DNA as a business to say that the bottom line is not going to be the only important thing. Of course, to be a successful business, you need to be financially sustainable as well, but you are going to take into consideration other stakeholders. Let's see, there are more. The measuring that I mentioned. A lot of companies use the impact assessment just to measure and meet certain targets, to say, okay, this is how I'm doing environmentally. Find your KPIs, write a report, communicate to external stakeholders that, okay, these are some things that I'm doing and I'm going to improve and do better. I'm sure I'm missing some things, but as I mentioned, the local community is important, the B locals, and leading a movement, just being part of this movement. There's only just under 4,000 certified B Corps right now. It's grown a lot over the past 5 to 10 years, but it's still tiny. So if you get on board now as part of this movement, you're really leading us into the future and part of this great community.
I love that. There are so many, I guess, intangible benefits that do come across from becoming B Corp certified as well, and joining a community that's committing to doing things differently. I think that there's a lot of value in that you can get out of it personally. And as an individual that as a consumer, you're looking to buy things in your everyday life. How can a consumer be more mindful about whatever they're purchasing? Do you just look for the B Corp label? Are you looking for other things? What is that thing as a consumer? How can you kind of help in that? If you're like, look, I don't have any control over whether I can personally be a B Corp because I don't run my own company. I just work for a company. We might be B Corp certified. I don't really have an involvement in that.
So you're asking, like, how can should a consumer think about it?
Yeah, like how would a consumer put it in their everyday life?
Certified now to make that the choice. But a lot of companies are, doing advertising, whether it's on their packaging or not, saying what they're doing that's good and what's not. But a lot of it can also be greenwashing. So you do have to be careful about what you're reading. So if you're really focused on making sure that your purchases and product usage is moving towards sustainable and not greenwashed and as good for the environment as it can be, the environment and other areas as it can be, is to use third-party resources like EWG, Environmental Working Group. They rank all of a lot of products based on environmental impact and health. There's a company called How Good that also looks at the supply chain and the ingredients in all kinds of products. So there are a number of different groups that are doing this research for you. Sometimes it's easier to find, sometimes it's harder to find, but there, and even Aspiration, has this credit card that you can like scan your product and you can see how it ranks or if it ranks. I think that's really limited to companies that have publicly available data. So,
Hmm.
none of them is perfect, but if you really care, do that research. The other thing I'd think about is as you're purchasing a product, think about, it's that whole reduce, reuse, recycle mindset. Like,
Hmm.
don't buy it if you don't need it. If it's not something that can be reused or you can't find a way to reuse it, definitely recycle it, but try to minimize new consumption.
Hmm.
That's harder to live by than it is to think about, but the more you start thinking about it, then little by little you may start implementing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're such a consumer-driven culture. I mean, a lot of products I think nowadays are just made quickly and not made to last. And part of sustainability, I think, is making something last. And a lot of people miss out on that. They're like, "Oh, you can recycle it, it's fine." But 9% of everything has ever been recycled, so it just gets lost in that system, and people feel good about it on one end, but the other end, it's not being talked about or shown or anything like that.
Right. It's
Um,
so easy to recycle, but it's harder to reuse and it's even
mhm.
harder to reduce, but we need to keep up in our game in all of those areas.
So, what's your favorite part of what you do day to day? So now that you've kind of grown a company, you have an awesome client base. What brings you joy day to day in what you do?
Learning about everything the companies we work with are doing. I'm not always the ones that have the initial conversations because my consultants are working more directly, but the information they may send me or ask me about because they often want my input on how to help evaluate something, I'll just be like, wow, that is so amazing that they're doing that, because it's not always out in the public domain, all of the level that companies are going to evaluate their supply chain or to ensure that their ingredients are non-toxic or bring workers in from a certain underrepresented group or building local. It's you may buy something for a company that is good, but it's the working with these leaders who are doing more and more and really aspire to do more is that I would say is my favorite, even though that's a little bit indirect, but directly it's just learning from and being part of this community. I mean, yesterday I spent a couple of hours, learning from a group on the sustainable development goals, and then another group that is looking at academic research and how B-Corp is impacting that. So just this whole discipline is really full of amazing people and thought leaders. And so just being able to be a part of that is so inspiring.
That's really cool. I mean, and it's so rewarding to be able to think be a part of that change as well. I mean, I think a lot of people miss out on the fact that as a consultant, you're guiding these people along this journey, and that there's so much value in kind of being that person that's helping them along that journey because it's it's hard. It's not easy, and for a lot of companies, it's a little bit scary. And for them to find comfort in working with you and impact growth partners, like that's huge. And I guess what is your hope for I guess the future of either business, consumers, the world, whatever it may be? Like what's kind of your hope for a more sustainable future? What do you see?
More equity, whether that comes from the decisions businesses make or what governments impose. I mean, hopefully it comes from business decisions as well. Um, Thinking about are my impacts on the environment the right ones, or am I going to make the cheapest versus making the cheapest, quickest product that's going to be bad for the environment. So that's really where, I mean, it's not going to happen anytime soon, but little by little, more and more companies are going to be making decisions that improve equity across the board. And hopefully we'll be in a place at some point where we're comfortable with how our businesses operate.
I like that. Equity is a good word. It's a great word. Um, so how can people kind of get a hold of you, um, Impact Growth Partners? What does that look like? How do you connect with you guys?
Well, the easiest way is just email me at jen@impactgrowthpartners.com, or we have a form on our website you can contact. Follow us on LinkedIn or Instagram. The content is different on both, but on Instagram, you'll learn a lot about the companies we work with and other specific B Corp stuff. And then on LinkedIn, we provide a lot more in-depth information. So those are the best ways. I'm always, as I mentioned before, educating is our goal. So, if you work for a company that may be interested in learning more, you don't have to only reach out to us. If you know you want to hire a consultant to work through B Corp certification, we're more than happy to get on the phone, do a Zoom with you guys, teach you all about it, go through all the nuts and bolts of what it takes to become certified, and then you can think about whether or not you pursue it. And becoming a certified B Corp is something that a company can do on their own for free. It's a free process. Once you are certified, you do have to pay B Lab an annual fee based on your revenues, but you don't have to use a consultant like us. We just exist because there are enough companies that really want to make sure they get to the end goal and realize they need a little bit of assistance with it, and it'll help them stay on track and understand what the goals are and be in a good position to get certified. So our goal, you asked about IGP's goal in terms of long term, is it's not just to build IGP as a business, but it's really to build the world of certified B Corps. And because B Lab is doing so many amazing things, I don't know if you saw, they just announced a White House initiative on inclusive economy. So they're asking for a division of the NEC to actually focus on a specific set of business related goals. So they're doing such amazing things that I love being a part of what B Lab is doing, even if it's peripherally.
That's awesome. Do you remember your first sustainable product that you purchased? That was considered sustainable, or that was.
Since I grew up with a very sustainable mother, she was the one going to the local co-op called Edge of the Woods in New Haven. It's still there, amazing store, but with her like reusable bags. Um, when in the 80s, when that was not mainstream at all. So she probably imposed some of that stuff on me without me even thinking about it. Um, but I guess consciously, I would probably say when my kids were really young, I was starting to pack them lunches and snacks for daycare or wherever, and making sure that everything I had was not. We try to be conscious of like chemicals and stuff in the household, so not just plastics, but like what were the right products to make sure that we weren't using plastic bags or even something that's reusable that's not healthy. And so we have these amazing stainless steel lunchbox type things in all different sizes that now my kids are 11 and 14 and I still use them in their lunches. So I've had the same products for 10 years, haven't, or more than that. Haven't had to buy new ones. And so I think that's probably one of the early things I can remember being super conscious about, making sure that we weren't creating more waste and also having something healthy for the family.
That's awesome. And now they're trendsetters because stainless steel lunchbox containers are now in. So everybody's like, "Oh my god, I want those things." Yep, that's really really cool. Well, I mean, I think that kind of wraps up everything. I just wanted to say thank you so much for just being a part of this. I think for so many businesses and people, for them to learn more about B Corp and specifically just the value that it brings in the community that it builds and the change that can be made from it is just incredible. And so I just wanted to thank you for just being a part of this and sharing your story and your knowledge with everybody.
Well, thank you for your thoughtful questions. I was expecting to just be doing a recap of, what B Corp certification is. And since we didn't get to all of those details, I'm happy, anyone who's listening to this, please reach out. I'm happy to share them. But your questions were very in-depth and thoughtful and forcing me to think outside the box about my passion and strategies and goals.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's my my favorite part about doing this is getting to know people and talking to people. Because at the end of the day, like no matter what your business is, no matter what your goals are, like we're all people at the end of the day. And I think that everybody has a very, very unique story and a very, very unique background. And when you can take that with a passion, that's when something really happens. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sustainable Goat. And thanks again to Jen for taking the time to talk B Corps and sharing with us the road that we are all on to a more sustainable world. And if you want to connect with Jen and her team, there will be links in the show notes. And if you haven't thought about either purchasing products from B Corps or getting your company certified, hopefully this helps in making that decision easier. Thanks again for listening to this episode of Sustainable Goat.